Over the past year, I didn't just install solar panels, I didn't just upgrade appliances, I didn't just replace my HVAC system, I redesigned how this house uses energy. And I didn't do it all at once. It actually happened over several months, actually beginning in December 2024, and then kind of going all the way until now. The real question I wasn't trying to answer wasn't just, can I lower my bills? Obviously I can, and I actually did between 2023 and 2024, not doing any upgrades, just changing out light bulbs and just kind of shutting light switches off and doing the normal thing that most people do. The real question became, can I reduce my exposure to rising utility costs? Because even though I saw a reduction in my energy use between 2023 and 2024, my bills actually went up because the cost of electricity also went up. So can I stabilize my long-term expenses? And can I do it in a way that makes financial sense? When I saw my bills in 2024, I was starting to think about what is this going to look like in 2025, and I wasn't happy with the answer to that. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like between 2023 and 2025. So here are the rising utility costs. So in 2023, I paid $2,383 essentially in electricity costs. And then if we take a look at 2024, I actually used less energy, but because the rate increased by about 2%, I paid almost the same amount in 2024 using quite a bit less energy. And then because we're adding data centers here in Northern Virginia, the anticipated increase in 2025 was about an 8% increase, which meant that my electricity bill is going to go up significantly. Now, this is my actual energy usage in 2025, and all these energy usages are the actual numbers from the utility. So what are the upgrades we're going to talk about as part of this video here? Now, in December 2024, that's when I installed the solar. And actually, we could back up to the year before, December of 2023, is when I installed a new roof. Now, when I bought this house, I knew I was going to have to replace the roof. It was already showing signs that it needed to be replaced. I didn't want to wait for a leak when it was going to be an emergency. It's kind of funny, my neighbor actually had a very similar type roof as I had, same age. It looked like maybe they did their installation around the same time. And it was pretty clear he was going to have to replace his roof pretty soon also. And I'd mentioned that maybe he should take a look at doing that before it becomes an issue. And sure enough, in the middle of December, January timeframe, they had an issue where it was very clear that they needed to replace their roof. Not necessarily the best time to replace a roof is in the middle of the winter. And that's kind of the situation. I wanted to have a leak that forced the requirement to have to replace my roof, or something even worse where it's kind of a massive issue, potentially thousands of dollars in damage. I knew I needed a new roof. I didn't want to wait for it to be an emergency. So that's where December 2023, I went and actually replaced my roof. Fast forward to December 2024. Towards the end of the year, and actually it was installed the day before New Year's Eve. So the installation took a couple days to get installed. It completed the entire process right at the very end of the year, and we got this new solar installation completed. Now, this is really the only thing on this list other than the radiant barrier that wasn't an actual requirement. Something didn't die that forced the upgrade. Solar was really the only thing that was an elected option. Same thing with the battery. So there are a couple things on here, but most of this stuff I waited for things to die or be close to dead where it made sense to just do a replacement. But we did the solar installation. Now, I do have videos on the solar installation, and solar related content will be in the playlist if you're curious, but there are videos, and I'll go ahead and put a link up here if you want to check out the solar videos where I talk about the solar installation. A lot of good content in there for the solar install. Now, it was right around Christmas Eve in December 2024 that our washer and dryer had issues and started to die. Now, these were also 10, 12 years old. They were Samsung appliances at the time, so that's about the lifespan of a Samsung washer or dryer. And like most families, when one thing dies that's that old, we decided to replace both items. So yeah, it was kind of an unexpected cost, especially as we're doing our solar installation here. But we did end up going with high efficiency LG. In this case, we switched from electric to a heat pump dryer. Now, I would say that the heat pump dryer uses significantly less energy than our previous electric, but I can't really show that change. We're doing a lot of different upgrades over the course of this year. So some of them you can't really see in the usage in the bill, but I would say that it does use quite a bit of less energy. I can actually see that. When we did our solar installation, we also did a span panel as part of that upgrade. And again, I've got content for the span panel also, and I'll put the link up here if you want to check that out. But we installed the span so we could actually see how much energy all this equipment is using in real time. The one caveat I would mention for the heat pump dryers is they do take a lot longer to warm up your clothes and get them dry. This was one of the things that my wife said she doesn't like is, hey, it takes forever for the dryer to complete. And it does, it takes quite a while. And it's kind of surprising that it can run for so long, take so long to actually dry, and still use significantly less energy than an electric by itself. So just kind of an interesting observation. Our energy usage for our washer and dryer is very insignificant in comparison to what you would expect from an electric version. Now you might be wondering, why do we have a recirculating pump in here as far as these upgrades and efficiency increases? Now I viewed this as a water bill reducer because in the mornings we would turn our water on upstairs in our master bath to take a shower, and it would take forever. I'd have plenty of time to floss and brush and do pretty much everything while I'm waiting for the water to actually heat up to be able to take a shower. So we're wasting a lot of water waiting for this stuff to heat up. And that's essentially why we bought this recirculating pump, was just to decrease the amount of water that we're wasting as part of our water bill. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the water bill as part of this. It's actually very hard to kind of show this, especially when you've got kids and things are changing and you've got daughters that like to take really long baths and you got a pool. So looking at our water bill is a little bit more complicated than probably the average bill to see what the impact of this was. But I would say that now when we get up in the morning, we have hot water almost immediately when we turn it on. And that's pretty much the only time of the day that I've got this thing set to go off is in the mornings before we're taking our showers. Yes, people take showers at different times of the day, but the primary one when everybody's taking the shower is right away in the morning, whether it's to go to school or work or whatever. So I think this worked really well for us, and it kind of fixed that waiting for a lot of water. And I'm not kidding, it would take 4 or 5 minutes for this to heat up. It was a really long wait for it. So it was a significant upgrade adding this recirculating pump. Then fast forward to April, and we were already having signs that our water heater was dying. We had a gas water heater, seeing a lot of water on the floor, which is one of the problems that we were identifying that, hey, this is probably going bad. Again, 15-year-old water heater, I believe, or right around there. It was definitely at its usage end. And we upgraded to a hybrid heat pump. Now, this is the most efficient water heater that's on the market at 4.07 UEF. And again, I got video content on this also. So if you want to check that out, I'll put the link for this here. But one of the best water heaters on the market as far as energy efficiency, way more efficient than any tankless option that's out there. Again, everything's kind of got its use case, but this is a much more efficient option for providing hot water to your house than pretty much anything that's on the market right now. Then fast forward to August, and this past year is when the new administration took over and the 30% credit was going away. So I already had it on my agenda to actually install geothermal as part of this. But of course, my house made it a little bit more of a timely issue, and our HVAC completely died in around August. Now, I actually started the process in July, but it did need us to kind of accelerate the process of getting this installed because it was pretty warm in July and August timeframe. So we had, and I've got pictures of where it was 92 degrees inside of our house. Very, very urgent to get this fixed in order to have a little bit more comfortable environment to stay in. But we ended up in August, it was actually installed mostly, but we didn't finish the installation until October. It did take a long time to get through the permitting process of actually installing the water lines for this closed loop system. And then in December 2025, this is where we start some more optional stuff. I wanted to put a radiant barrier in, and it's way too hot over the summer to do this. So I did a radiant barrier and I used attic foil. And if you go to my Amazon storefront in the description, you'll see the exact version of attic foil that I used. Stuff works great, very easy to do. I did this installation entirely myself. And if you look at the Amazon and the Lowe's storefronts in there, you'll see some of the tools that I used as part of this process. Very easy. I haven't done a video on attic foil installation yet. Since it's already done, I might do just kind of a what does it look like, how was the process, in a future video here. But I did install this radiant barrier into our attic space. And then in December, we also started and completed our Sol Ark 18K. And our Pytes battery edition. And again, I've got lots of content on this. Go ahead and check these videos out here if you're interested in seeing that. But there's actual playlists for Pytes and for Sol Ark as part of this installation. So there's lots of content on there and more to come as far as how that actually turned out. But check out those videos if you're curious. But that is my journey to energy independence from 2024 to the present. I might be saying, wasn't this a lot of money? Yes, it was. And some of it, again, was forced. The water heater was dying, the HVAC died, the washer and dryer died. It was an incredibly expensive year, unfortunately. Some of this I was planning to do, like in the case of the solar, and then when the administration changed and decided to kill the federal tax credits, that was a forcing mechanism also. There is an argument to say that the industry is a little overpriced right now, so the prices might eventually come down. I actually don't think the battery is necessarily overpriced, although battery does tend to continue to decrease as they come out with new technologies. For example, the sodium batteries that are out there, or the LFP batteries that just came out to kind of drop the prices. So I think a lot of this will continue to decrease, but I'm not entirely convinced that the cost of doing a solar battery is going to drop by 30%. So I wanted to make sure that I got this. And when you're talking about drilling your geothermal, I tend to think that's probably not going to change. It's an expensive thing to dig these wells 250 to 400 feet deep into the ground. Not exactly cheap. So I actually don't think the price of these is going to drop by 30%, which made them important for me to try to get that federal tax credit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost of some of this as we move forward here. Now, in terms of cost, probably the cheapest one on here is the recirculating pump. We're not going to see huge changes here, but we will see a modest decrease on our water bill by not having to wait for all that water. And this was probably a $300 piece of equipment. And if you're familiar with how to do your plumbing, this is actually really easy to install, assuming you've got an electrical outlet nearby to plug it into. So it's a very easy upgrade for most people. And even hiring a plumber, it's probably not that expensive. But again, plumbing rates are locality driven, so it might be more expensive in your area than, for example, some other place. And actually in Northern Virginia, everything is kind of expensive here, to include plumber and electrician rates. So it is kind of an expensive place. It's not as bad as probably New York, but it is expensive to do things here in the Northern Virginia area. Hands down, the biggest impacts for 2025 and moving on to 2026 was our solar installation, obviously, because it's producing a ton of energy for the house and offsetting most of these, especially the ones that were conversions from natural gas over to electricity, and then our geothermal system here. And having not had that for an entire year, I haven't done a lot of content on this other than the actual installation and some of the things related to that. I'll be doing more content as far as the impact of pretty cold winter. We actually got down to negative degrees for a short period, not a long time in Northern Virginia, and we don't have that kind of extended like you would have, say, in the Midwest or up in Canada or something like that. But I will be talking a little bit about what was the impact here for having 8 inches of snow on the ground, having some negative degree days, having a lot of days in the 10-degree range. And then I'll also be talking about future content when we start talking about the summer here in Northern Virginia and what do we experience with as far as cooling the house. So those are some planned content videos to come up in the future, which is probably a good point to say. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you get notified about content when I post it. It really does help the channel grow. Now let's talk numbers. Now I'm not going to talk about everything that I installed. I'm just going to focus on the solar because that has an impact as far as everything that I installed, especially things that I converted from gas over to electric. So I'm just going to focus on solar for this. The solar system I bought was $67,500 and my tax credit was $20,250. And yes, I did get it all back. I pay a lot in federal taxes. I had a little bit of a carryover to the next year, but for the most part, I got everything back. So my overall system cost $47,250. Now there is probably a strong argument that if I'd done everything myself, I could have probably got it for a little bit less than $47,250. At one point, I did add everything up, and I want to say it was around $20,000 to $25,000 for everything, not including the span panel. Now, the span panel is an additional $6,000 on my installation to get that installed. So you got to figure $47,250, subtract the $6,000 from that. That's the actual cost of the solar installation. The main panel upgrade was an additional that I wanted to do, and I was actually looking at doing the span panel even before I was considering getting the solar because I wanted to be able to see where I was using my electricity. But this is essentially what it cost for my solar installation. Just keep in mind, it is a little bit inflated just because of that span panel upgrade. And yes, I do actually think that solar install costs will go down now that the federal tax credit has been put out there. I don't know that it's going to go down by 30%. I think that there's a lot of people that are exaggerating the impact of dealer fees and some of these other things that are out there. I don't think that the cost savings is going to be as much as people are claiming. It would be nice if the overall cost came down by 30%. Our labor tends to cost more than a lot of the other countries that are doing this kind of stuff. So it does tend to cost a little bit more for us, and I think it's always going to, but I can see some of that cost coming down a little bit in 2026 and probably through to 2027 as well. But that was my cost. Now I might be wondering, was it worth it? Well, one way to look at whether it was worth it or not is how long is it going to take me to pay this off, and will it completely offset my electricity at some point? So here's my payoff timeline. And again, I left it as $47,000. I could have subtracted the $6,000 cost of the solar panel, and then this would be even a quicker timeline. So just keep that in mind, is even though I'm showing 17 years or 21 years, it's actually going to be quite a bit less than that by probably about 2 years, give or take. Now, what are we showing here? I'm going to show you my electric bills here in a few minutes. But essentially, if I was to just take the savings from 2025 and pull that forward, it would take me 21 years to essentially completely pay it off. And actually, that 21st year, it's like $78. So it's really being paid off in 20 years. But technically, there's 1 month that there's about $78-ish in that next year. So yes, I guess 21 years is kind of the math worked out to be. And then if we say that there's a 2% increase in the cost of electricity every single year, then we're talking 17 years to pay off the entire system. Now, since my system comes with a 25-year warranty, it will pay itself off in either case before I hit the end of that warranty period. So in the case of my system, yes, it will absolutely make sense to have this. And if we continue to look down here, we can see kind of the estimated amount of savings here. And we can see that we're looking at around the $30,000 it's going to make me essentially as we move forward in time beyond the payoff, because essentially it's just completely paid off. Now, in reality, for my system is already completely paid off. One of the reasons that I wanted to do solar and I wanted to do some of these investments into my house was to get it ready for retirement age. I don't want to have all these crazy bills when I'm hitting my retirement age. And right now I have enough money to afford to be able to kind of do some of this stuff within reason. It was definitely an incredibly expensive year, but I was able to pay off my solar in that period of time. So solar is 100% paid off. Some will say that it might have made more sense to put it into the stock market and you get all these returns, but it kind of comes down to how much it's worth to not have that bill holding you down. Let's say I lost my job tomorrow. I don't want to have a whole bunch of loans that I have to pay off. So I look at paying things off as kind of a financial security standpoint, where I don't have to necessarily lose the house because I've got all these bills that I can't make. So I always put a lot of money into paying off all of the things that I'm financing to make sure I don't have those things dragging me down for the unfortunate time when maybe I get let go from a job or some other major issue happens. So I don't necessarily put a lot of money into the stock market unless I've got a lot of these bills paid off. I'd much rather have financial security, owning my house, not having loans. I haven't had a car payment in more than a decade. I don't like to have a lot of bills as a noose around my neck. So for me, that's important. Maybe for other people, they say, yes, you shouldn't do that. You should always put it into the stock market. I think there's an argument for both, but I sleep really well knowing that if I was to lose my job, I'm not necessarily going to lose the house because I can't afford to make payments. But just looking at my system, it will pay itself off before I hit the end of that warranty period. So yes, it's worthwhile for me, especially given my goals of trying to be energy independent and not having a ton of bills when I hit my retirement years. All right, so now let's talk about utility costs and what was the impact. Now we can take a look at 2023, 2024, and 2025, just realizing 2025 is when I had the solar installed. So the information on my electric bill was a little bit different. I actually used the average rate of electricity for Dominion in Virginia in order to calculate a lot of this estimated cost. But this is essentially my energy usage. So we went from 16,009 to 15,800. And again, I did do a lot of energy upgrades between 2023 and 2024 that I didn't talk about, things like changing out pool pumps and LED light bulbs. So there were some things that I did here to kind of reduce this. And then obviously we added a lot of electric appliances. So we saw an increase again because I switched from natural gas over to electric or heat pump in some cases. So my increase here is because of a lot of those conversions. And we can see that the cost did go down a little bit, but there's a 2% energy increase. So even though I had a pretty significant energy decrease, my cost was actually pretty comparable because of that 2% increase. And then we take a look at the increase in 2025. And again, we have a lot of data centers here in Virginia that are starting up. So the electricity rates, like across most of the country, have increased significantly in Northern Virginia. And this is the estimated increase is essentially it went from around 14 cents to 15 something is the average cost of electricity in 2025. And we can see this is kind of what my cost was projected to be if I did nothing. So that's kind of the problem, right? So this is what I was trying to fix, was paying $2,561 for energy in 2025. And it's only going to get worse the more time that goes by. Again, 2% is probably a good planning factor. Is every year you're going to see a 2% increase in your energy bill. Some people saw as much as 10% across the country. So this is actually pretty conservative to say 2%. So what was the outcome? Now, this is, again, taking into consideration what the projected cost was. So essentially we had an expected cost of $2,561.76. My solar savings was essentially $1976.05 because my actual cost, what I actually paid for electricity in 2025 was $585.71. Now, I also get SREC revenue, so I actually got paid $382.55. So my out-of-pocket for the entire year of 2025 for electricity was $203.16. So a significant decrease in the cost of electricity. $203 for my electric bill, pretty phenomenal rate. So yes, very successful in achieving my goals. Now, keep in mind, if you were paying for your electricity bill and your loan at the same time, your actual out-of-pocket per month might actually exceed what you were paying for electricity before. So definitely keep that in mind. In my case, again, I was paying off a lot of my solar as I went. So my monthly was quite a bit higher than it was before, but it's also completely paid off. So I don't have to worry about that moving forward at this point. This will essentially be my electric bill kind of moving forward into next year. But I also added battery at the end of last year. So there are some things that I'm still working out with that might impact things for 2026. All right, now let's take a deeper dive into the numbers. So here's 2024 and here's 2025. Now you might be wondering, why are we saying that there's a savings of $18.24? This comparison is just showing the actual difference. It isn't factoring in some of the things that we factored in the previous stuff. So if I just looked at the actual costs, this is my savings. So I'm not taking a look at, the actual average cost of 2025 was X. I'm not factoring that in. I'm just saying, hey, this is what I paid in 2024. This is what I paid in 2025, not what it should have been if I was actually paying what everybody else is paying, if that makes sense. So that's why the numbers are a little bit different. This is actually based on my energy bills. I put all my energy data into Power BI. So this is all real numbers, not the average essentially for 2025. So what are we saying here? In 2024, I paid $2,108.53 in comparison to the $585.71 here, and we can actually see the difference. So in the beginning of the year, my energy bill was quite a bit higher because it was still a little bit of time for everything to get kind of up and running. And then we see the electricity drop significantly because my solar is now running and offsetting, and I'm using credits and everything else to offset my actual energy bill. So as time goes by, my energy bill decreases significantly. Now I did see a little bit of an increase when we start going to the end of the year because of standby charges. In Northern Virginia Dominion, they give you standby charges for your system if it's over a 15 kilowatt system, and mine is definitely over 15 kilowatts. So I have to worry about standby charges. So that's why there's a little bit of an increase here when everything's overcast and there's not a lot of sun up there. So that's essentially why you see this increase here. Now, natural gas is interesting because, again, we replaced a water heater and we replaced our geothermal system. So if we take a look at this and we look at April, so if we focus over here and we look at April, we can see that we're paying around $125 down to around $85 when we move into our April timeframe. Again, starting to warm up, so our actual gas usage is decreasing. And then if we come over here, we'll see the same thing. So in April, our natural gas was around 91. Again, just installing it. The following month, we dropped down to $28. So in May, $28 versus May of the previous year was $42. So we can see that we're seeing that decrease. That's the effect of just replacing the water heater. So our gas bill is going down. Now let's take a look at our gas bill. So if we look at the end of the year here, we are seeing $129 in December, and we can see this rising cost of heating the house going from $67 to $129. But because we've got our geothermal system in here, we're down to $16 towards the end of the year, $17, very different usage of gas $34. October, again, fully up and running in October at this point. So we're seeing significant decreases in our gas. Now, I still have a gas fireplace, and then I've also got a gas stove. So we're still using gas in our house. Plus, I've got a gas water heater for our pool. So I still do use a little bit of gas. And actually, if we look at this between 2025 and 2024, this spike here is actually heating the pool. So that was a pretty significant spike here. And then I did adjust my usage. This is kind of getting everything up and running and actually warming it up for the first time of the year. So a lot of gas went into heating the pool initially. So that's why we had that little bit of spike there. That wouldn't have been over here. So this actual difference here, you see the increase is because we added the gas water heater in 2024. Didn't really use it in 2024. It was kind of the end of the season for it, but we did use it here. So we actually see an increase in gas usage across the year because now we're heating our pool. So don't be misled by this difference here. The actual usage, when you look at the apple-to-apple comparison between 2024 and 2025 at the end of the year, where the water heater in the pool is not an issue, we can see it is a significant decrease in usage. And then obviously we've got our SREC revenue that we're pulling in here. So again, $1,824 saved. Realistically though, it is the higher number of around $2,300. But this is just, again, based on purely the bills that we saw, kind of explaining what we're seeing here. So again, factoring in gas and electricity, as well as your SREC revenue here, you can see that my total expenditure for 2025 was $1,226.99. Again, the biggest comparison between this and the previous visualizations that I was showing you is we're including the natural gas here. And instead of looking at what the cost should have been if I was paying the 15 plus cents per kilowatt hours without solar, that's why we're seeing different numbers on this. But we can see overall, this gas cost is a little bit inflated because of the addition of the water heater for this portion here. And I also didn't factor in the cost difference between the cost of natural gas in 2024 and the cost of natural gas in 2025. There was a percentage increase here as well. But again, this didn't factor in any of those. This is just the actual bills that was paid for 2024 and 2025. Now, don't forget, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help the channel grow. But that's essentially my breakdown of whether it was worth it or not. And as we can see, whether we're looking here at the actual bills and what changed on the physical bills, or we're looking at it just in terms of electricity on exactly what was saved here from an electricity perspective alone. That the installation of solar plus all the other changes that I made in my house have definitely resulted in some cost savings for me, making the upgrades worth it in my scenario. Not to say that my scenario will match your situation and what you're trying to accomplish, but my solar will definitely pay for itself within the time that I've got the warranty for it. And not having an electric bill or a very low electric bill moving forward is going to be phenomenal. Now, as we look at this timeline here, the one thing that I didn't factor in as part of this process is the battery, because that was ended at the very end of the year. And I will say it's going to take a couple months to figure out exactly what is the right settings for this. In the end of the year, in the beginning of 2026, there are definitely some factors here to work out. Now, I'm not generating enough solar to actually charge this thing, so I'm actually charging it partially off the grid. There were a couple days in the month of February so far where I actually got really close to fully charging this during the day. So my actual pull from the grid was actually pretty high, so we're going to see how that demand shakes out on my bill. I might have to adjust things again moving into the next billing cycle. I'm still working out the specifics with each bill that I get on what settings work best for my setup here. It has become very clear that I need to add more battery here. So I installed 40 kilowatts, and I suspected I would need another 40 kilowatts for a total of 80 to 120 kilowatts for my system. And I have definitely confirmed that another 40 kilowatts is definitely going to be necessary. I'll probably do it in stages. I'll add the next 40 kilowatts of storage, and then I'll reassess on whether I need to get to 120 kilowatts and kind of go from there. But that's a planned upgrade for 2026 or potentially 2027 as I work out some other things that need to be fixed as well. The one downfall of buying a house that was built in 1979 is that everything needs to get fixed, replaced, or updated. Just last week, I had a fence post snap, and my fence is probably 15 to 20 years old. So it's about time for a new fence. And that's just one example of things that have continuously gone wrong with this house. It is definitely a money pit owning some of these older houses. but some of that was expected. So how would I summarize things? I would summarize it as it's definitely a good idea to break up all these kinds of updates for your house. And in my case, I planned a lot of this stuff years in advance. I was already looking at heat pump washers and dryers, for example, because again, you know how old the stuff in your house is, or you've got a theory if you bought a brand new house and some of it came with, you got a pretty good idea of how old some of that stuff is. You know that you're going to have to replace it. So I spent years kind of doing some research, whether it was the geothermal system. I spent a couple years looking at the different water heaters. None of the stuff on here was a snap decision that was put into the house. Yes, some of the stuff died and I had to make a kind of a quick update to my plan to actually get stuff done. But everything was scheduled and planned. I already knew exactly which water heater I was going to get when it did die. I already knew about the geothermal and I knew which company, and I kind of understood the price of things. Everything else was planned out for a couple years in advance, also to include the attic foil. I knew I was going to get battery, but it wasn't entirely clear which brands I was going to go with. So this was kind of a moving target, whether it was going to be the EG4 Flex Boss with the Grid Boss and potentially EG4 batteries, or the Sol Ark and the Pytes. There was quite a bit of back and forth on what was going to be best for my situation as far as battery goes. But again, I knew I wanted the battery, so it wasn't a shock. It was just a matter of figuring out which brands made the most sense. So my recommendation is to plan ahead as much as possible, kind of figure out what your goals are, when you would like to get them, and then start building a actual plan for when you're going to do stuff. Now, in my case, the plan actually started with the roof because I knew I needed a new roof in order to support solar. So that was the first step, was to replace that. But this was a multi-year plan and I'm not done yet. I've still got a couple other upgrades that I want to do, to include the EV charger and the actual EV. So those are all things that are on my plan. This stuff all contributes to having more money to actually do some of those things. So having the solar eliminated a lot of cost over the last year that I can put into paying all the geothermal and some of these other things off, and then buying that EV, and ideally with cash so that I don't have another car payment again. But that's kind of my plan, and where I'm going with this channel is showing you these kinds of things, as well as the EV and the EV charger installation. So those are all things that are going to happen on this channel in the future as well. But hopefully you found the content helpful. Let me know in the comments, what kind of upgrades are you planning to do? I'm curious if there's anybody else that has kind of a multi-year plan of where they'd like to get to. Until next time.